So, my first experience with Shakespeare was one in which I was about 13, and I happened to watch a TV show, and it was with Japanese characters, and it was in English subtitles. I came to find out later, after a totally absorbing experience, that it was Kurosawa's Throne of Blood. And I think it was so satisfying for me because as an African American, I felt like there was so much when I was growing up that seemed unjust. And here was divine justice, and boy, was it satisfying. But my next deep experience with Shakespeare occurred at the end of graduate school. I had been raised by maternal grandparents, and my father's was Haitian, well educated. For him, education was the top. When I was about to graduate, he wanted to see me march. However, there had been a procedural glitch in the final days before the ceremony, and I learned I was going to have to wait another semester in order to actually graduate. He was furious. He blamed me. He said, once again, you get things wrong. Do you ever get things right? Even though it wasn't my fault. And so, as I drove him back to the airport, he came from New York, he thought the trip had been a waste. As I drove him back to the airport, he's yelling at me, I'm yelling at him. What have you ever done? What have you ever helped us? You let my mother down, you let my father down, you've let me down. I mean, it was one of those family rows that I think we all can recognize. He's yelling in French, in Creole, I'm yelling in English. I dropped him at the airport, immediately went to my professor's house. She was working in her garden, pulling out tomatoes, pulling up lettuce and things, and I went into a rail against my father. She listened carefully, and she stopped and said, your father gave you everything you need. He gave you life, he gave you good brains, and he gave you good looks. That stopped me for a minute. Everything else you can get on your own. And it wasn't good enough. I still criticized him. And finally she turned to me and she said, the branch that attacks the tree will itself die. I said, what? Speak English. She says, the branch that attacks the tree will itself die. The Merchant of Venice. Read it. Think about it. So I immediately stopped in my tracks, The Merchant of Venice. She said, this is the play where Shakespeare was prophet. And so began our discussion. In a world that comes to confuse the material with the spiritual, every human relationship is tainted. So a father sets his daughter up as a lottery prize. Friends base their relations on borrowing and lending money. Christians engaged in a slave trade condemn a Jew for desiring a pound of flesh. And Portia, dear Portia, states her racial bigotry against the Prince of Morocco and later gives a speech about the quality of mercy when she has none, and neither do the others, for Shylock. So when all human flesh has a price, a material worth, anything is possible. For a minute, boy, did that stop me in my tracks. I began to understand my father's need to see me walk as a confusion of spiritual with material. I was going to get my degree, but he needed to see me walk. And I was guilty too. So at that point, I began to see the relevance of Shakespeare in my life. And that's the relevance that I love to bring to my classroom. For students today, certainly experience this same lesson of confused values. For example, they apply to college, lots of seniors. But it's really not about just getting an education. As soon as they say they're into college, it's which college? Okay? Or someone gets engaged. And they say, oh, I found the love of my life. I have a ring. And we want to see the ring. And we want to see the size of the ring. Or how about this? At graduation, when everyone's happy and celebrating the movement through education, and now we're going to go off, kids go up to each other and they say, what'd you get? What'd you get for graduation? What would happen, I say to students, if you turned and you said to your friend, I got a lot of love and a lot of support from my parents. You got nothing, huh? So that's what I think we live in a world in which this play, The Merchant of Venice, is so apropos to our time. And it is a play that teaches us a lot about the confusion of spiritual and material on religious grounds, on mercantile grounds, and on human grounds. And for me, I thank my teacher because she taught me more than The Merchant of Venice. And thank you, Shakespeare.